Hey guys, Tim here, Big Dog Forge. Welcome back. This time we're going to continue with the Canoe Damascus billet that we made, and we're going to turn that into a knife. A bunch of people decided that it would be good if it were some sort of a Bowie knife. So that's what I'm going to do. And a bit of a long video, but there's a lot to get done. So stick with me, guys. Should be fun. Okay, gang, here we go. Now this is our billet that we ended up last time from the Canoe Damascus. And the thing's about 11 inches long, and we're going to take a couple of inches of that and turn it into a tang. We got little Tim in the forge there heating it up for us. Alright, so we drew out the tang and unfortunately did not catch any of that on video, but this is what it looked like right after we drew it out. We're going to get it over to the belt sander here and flatten this thing out. And I've gathered up most of the pieces and parts to build myself a surface grinder, like a belt type surface grinder. Pretty good one. Got a nice magnetic chuck, all that stuff. And I need to take the time to do that, make a little video about it, because I got to be honest with you, this gets really boring surface grinding this way. It's just all right. We're going to do a little design, because as you remember, if you go back and watch the Canoe Canister Damascus video, the backbone of this thing is wrought iron, and we need to put a little clip point on it. We're going to make sort of a buoy kind of thing, and we need to get rid of that wrought iron at the very tip. We need to drop that down below that. It would be a little bit soft for a cutting edge or a tip. So we're going to make ourselves a little pattern here. This is something I've not done before, is the pattern thing. And I guess you call that a choil area. We're going to put a little gap between the guard and the plunge line, I guess you would call it. I don't know all these terms. I don't make knives. I just pretend like I do. I watch a lot of other people make them and then kind of simulate what they do. Alright, we're going to cut all that away, and I won't bore you with that, so bling, there you go. We cut that away with the bandsaw. And we're going to do a profile shaping. Profiling. That's I heard that on a Stuart Smith video, as a matter of fact, that I watched recently. And we'll get this thing close to where we want it. And we got our little magnetic block to keep our hands away from the belt, nice and cool. And again, we're just taking some meat off this thing, getting it nice and flat all the way around. There we go. Do some final profiling on this thing. Right on. Alright, so no blue Dicam for me. I just don't have any in the shop. So we're going to use a Sharpie to color in the edge, and we'll lay this down on our semi-flat bench and use a drill bit to score the center line. So we'll have some lines to grind to. And we're going to grind this down to about the thickness of a dime, they say. This is going to be our, I don't know what we call this, a choil area, something like that. And the guard is going to slide up behind it, which is another story. When we get to the guard, we'll get some fun happening there. All right. There she is, nice and clean. So we put our little horizontal bench on there. And this is my makeshift bevel guide, because starting off freehand with these things, I'm just not any good at it. And I've had some practice, but just not enough. So I establish my bevels with this thing, and then I'll carry on by hand a little bit later once I get closer. But just getting that initial bevel established is a little bit difficult. So we went up in grit, obviously, And I kept going up in grit on this thing, and I got to about an 800 grit because I wanted as little hand sanding as, you know, as possible, simply because it's, I don't know, hand sanding is not my funnerest thing to do. All right, time for the heat treat. We got it just about where we want it. And I'm a little bit worried because the spine of this is wrought iron. It's got a leaf spring for a core, and then it's got chainsaw blades on either side that were in that Canoe Damascus, surrounded by 1084 powdered steel. So we're going to see if this thing splits, cracks, and I didn't hear any noises. I didn't feel any tings or anything, and it came out fairly straight. So I was happy, and it did that thing, what do they call that, martensite, turns kind of gray as it transforms into martensite. I think that's what it's called anyway. You can tell I've been watching a lot of knife maker videos. So yes, I didn't show it, but I tempered this thing twice at 400 degrees in a little heat treating toaster oven. And we're just going to clean this thing up and make sure she's nice and flat again. And then we're going to polish it down to, again, back to, I think it was an 800. It could have been a 600 finish, but I think it was an 800 grit finish before we go to hand sanding this thing. And I wanted to sand it to a fine finish before I heat treated it, because from what I understand, if you've got some deep scratches and grooves, that can sometimes develop into a crack under heat treatment. So just want to take a little extra time, get the finish down to something that's a little finer. In each one of these steps. So I hand sanded this thing, and I took it up to an 800 grit sandpaper, hand sanding it in preparation for an etch. And it's going to be a sort of a primary etch, because it's going to get etched again later on. I'm going to do something that's a little bit unorthodox, but I saw one guy do it, and I sent him a little email, and he's like, yeah, it's fine, it works. People don't like it. We'll see, you know, what you guys think, but we'll talk about that when we get to it in a bit. All right, so get a little cloth and laid down. We're going to put our pretty side down. We don't want to scratch it all up. And we'll do side 2. And you're going to notice from that tang transition, that narrow tang up into the blade, I've got some real long sloping shoulders to give it as much strength as possible. I drew that tang out. It's not too small, and I've had tangs, you know, smaller tangs on knives before, but there we go. That's the initial etch. Didn't come out too bad, but it's just a light etch to get it started. All right, this is some of our feather pattern Damascus that we're just not going to do anything with, so I am going to build a guard out of it. And the idea is to make the guard, like you saw in the picture in the beginning, go above and below the blade. And you know, it's great to start off with these awesome plants and have, you know, the best intentions in the world. Sometimes they don't work out so well. All right, taking all these measurements, and my intention was to get this into the drill press and drill through this thing. And, well, it had other ideas. The drills just wouldn't cut into it. So we did get some divots to mark our areas, which is good. And we're going to use this grinding stone on the end of that Dremel tool. And we were able to cut through big enough to get our files in there. And then this was a good couple of hours worth of filing to get this thing close enough. And You got to notice there's no shoulder on the bottom for that thing to sit up against. Well, it's because we're going to solder this thing into place. And from what I understand, that's a little bit of an old school thing. I think there's people that still do it. I've been watching a few videos on that and how that's done, the do's and don'ts, and we're going to give it a shot. I've not done that before. So this little shoulder that I'm filing on the top is into the wrought iron, and that's going to give us a little stop, so we stop at the same spot every time, just like that. And it fits pretty good. The backside's a little sloppy, but we do have a little bit of a gap, and we're going to cut this guy out and start shaping it. And that gap that's in that thing between the blade and this thing is bothering me. It just, you know, the whole time I'm shaping this thing, I'm thinking I'm not sure that that's going to fill in with solder very well, and that maybe we need to do something about it. So my thought was we could slide the blade into it, stick it under Floyd the press, and just squish it down a little bit. I mean, it's only a few thousand. It shouldn't hurt anything. Or it might hurt something. We'll find out. It's not looking too bad. All right, so this is a block of wood sent to us courtesy of Philip Taylor, IB something. Anyway, I don't know exactly what this wood is, but it's a really cool, kind of a burl looking thing. We're going to use the old Boyce and Crane bandsaw. I cut this thing out with a little bit. Alright, I think that'll look pretty good. Now this is stabilized wood, and that's going to be a key thing for later on. And we'll get to that in a bit. We need to drill a hole in this thing so we can get our tang through there. And I've got this brass. It's not quite as thick as I want, so I'm going to double up the layers. And then I realize we may be able to see the split in those layers later on, but that doesn't bother me so much. I just want the little thicker brass in there, and I'm using what I have at hand. So there we go. That's our stack to begin with. And we're going to contour this handle a little bit, cut some of that wood off. When we get ready to grind it, we'll have less work to do. Back over to the, and we adjust the blade on this thing a little bit. Back over to the Boyce and Crane. And if you haven't checked out the video where we rebuilt this bandsaw, it'd be a good one to look at. It was a lot of fun doing the rebuild on this thing. Got it for free. A friend of mine pulled it out of a dumpster, brought it to me. All right, and we're going to get these glued on here, get them lined up. And again, I won't bore you with the gluing. We'll just poof, it's glued. All right, and we just used 5-minute epoxy and actually left that overnight. Okay, so here's our guard. We cleaned it up on the belt sander up to a 800 grit, then polished it down to 1200 grit. And we put it on there, and we decided to just squish it a little bit with Floyd the press. Give it about 16 tons of pressure, and it split right there on the top. And the bottom seems to be okay. There's no problem there, down towards the blade end. So we're just going to cut that off right there and match it to the top of the blade. There we go. That was quick and easy, huh? We'll get the blade clamped in this thing, and all right, get it over to the belt sander, and we will match those guys up best we can. And we'll do some more, contouring and shaping later on once we get the handle assembled and all that good stuff. We'll do a final shaping of that. All right, so I'm putting some paste flux on the blade itself, and I put a little bit inside the guard, and we're going to get this thing clamped in the vise. And this is silver bearing solder. I think it's got like 20% silver, something like that in it. And it melts at a relatively low temperature. And in watching these other guys do this, cutting little pieces, laying it around, and heating up the guard is the idea until it melts down between the two. And there's methods of cleanup that I'm going to go through just to make sure that I get it done as best I can with a nice clean line. And it actually melted in pretty well. There's a couple of gaps in between the segments I put down, so I'm just going to give it a little help, a little extra solder. And then I'm just wiping it off with a rag. Now, in the old days, my dad was a plumber when I was a kid as a profession, and I had been sweating pipes together for a very long time, and this was very much the same. You know, wipe it off with a rag to tin it a little bit and clean it up, and the lines came out pretty well. Now this is the back side. It's got a little more stuff on it, and I'm going to go after it with a couple of different files to get those lines as best I can. And I'm not too worried about scratching this side up, because the handle is going to cover up most of it, and the little bit that does stick out is going to be I'll have a chance to clean that up anyway before I assemble. So this little triangular shape file is doing a pretty good job, although that solder loads up in it pretty quickly. Keep having to clean it out. And this method is pretty good. I like this. It really makes a nice connection to that guard. And most of the guards you see soldered on are they're pinned through. They're bronze and they're pinned in place. You guys are hearing Big Dog in the background bark. Sorry about that. She must have seen the mailman. She loves the mailman. Anyway, so I'm just sort of burnishing this with the end of my little Jimmy DeResta ice pick. That's another video. It's kind of fun to watch. You might want to go check that one out. And we've got our 600 grit emery cloth. I'm sorry, that's a 1200 grit emery cloth. Okay, so you're going to notice on top of that guard there's a piece of brass. I soldered that on there. I wanted to cap off the top of that guard, and it'll contour and match the brass that's behind the guard, between the guard and the wood. There was less than a perfect match in that area, and I thought that'd be a great way to cap it off. Since we don't have any pins in this guard, we're going to be using some epoxy to glue that handle onto the back of it anyway. So I'm just going about the beginning shapings of the handle, and I was worried about overheating that brass on there a little bit too much and that coming apart. But it seemed to work out okay. It didn't come off the wood while I was shaping it. And, you know, afterthought, I probably should have soldered that to the guard, the back of the guard. But here nor there, it worked out pretty well. And we're doing the initial shaping on the handle there. And this is, again, something that I saw Stuart Smith doing, and he talked all about shaping handles and using the slack part of your belt and how to do that. It was a very informative video, so thank you, Stuart Smith. I really appreciate that. You guys got some pretty good content. I think he's in South Africa, I'm not sure. All right, so this is a pommel, little butt cap, and I'm going to put this on here. This piece of brass, I'm going to solder it directly to that. Paste flux on both of them, and I'm over fluxing these a little bit. It'll run out, but it'll help that brass adhere to that steel a little bit better. I'll just indirect heat from underneath, and I'll go ahead and melt that solder right onto the back of that pommel, butt cap, whatever you want to call it. Whatever you professional knife guys call this thing. I drop that right on there, heat it from the top. And you can just see the, well, you can't see it, but while I was doing it, I could see the solder just settle right down, and those two sandwiched right together. So run a little extra solder around the edges, make sure there's enough in there. And that steel stayed hot long enough to act as a soldering iron to let me get that filled up. Alright, we'll grind off the excess brass on this thing, and then we'll start shaping it. And I'm going to give it basically the same shape as the lower part of the guard, but in the opposite direction. And again, I took it up to about 800 grit belt. To get it ready for an etch. And this is what I was talking about earlier, that I was emailing this gentleman about, was etching that stuff. And the way I'm going to do that is going to be a little different. So what I did is I put a little offset in the tang here, and I'm rounding it so that I can run a die over it and thread that thing. So we're going to put a nut on it. And the nut that I'm going to put on this, the last time I did a knife like this and put a nut on it, I just put a little brass nut that I had in the shop on there and just kind of left it that way. And I got a bunch of flack from a lot of people. A knife deserves something better than that. Well, it probably does, and so does this one. But I'm going to do the same thing because it's what I have at hand, and I can change it later on. I'll make a nice, I don't know, a nice Damascus nut or something like that later on. But for this video, and to get through this build, that little brass nut that's on there is what's going to stay there. Alright, so what I'm doing is I'm shaping that pommel to the end of the handle in the wood, making them match up. Now this is a worn out 800 grit belt with a lot of slack in it, and I'm just doing a final polish touch up. And I didn't show you here because I didn't turn the camera on, but I just assembled all of it with 5-minute epoxy. Now this is all going into the ferric chloride. And this is where I was talking to that young man, and he's like, yeah, just if you've got stabilized handle wood, it'll turn it darker, but it'll be fine. Just drop the whole thing in, etch it all at once. You get a nice even etch all over. But that's why I did the blade initially, because I wanted a little deeper etch on that than I did on the guard. So again, my worn out 800 grit belt, and I'm using it as a just a sharpening stone. And there we go, guys. You're gonna have to let me know what you think about this one. And we will build a different nut, and I'll update you on that when I get that done for the end of the tang. There you go. Alright guys, there you go. Thanks for watching the video, and thanks for sticking with me this long. It didn't come out too badly. I kind of like it, and I'm not sure. Tell me what you think. It's a heavy knife. It's heavy. All of this Damascus in here and there make it pretty darn heavy. I haven't weighed it. I don't know exactly what it weighs, but it's got kind of a cool look to it. I like it. And yeah, like I said, let me know what you think. And I will be building a little better nut than that, but just haven't had the time, and wanted to share this with you guys. So all right, there you go, guys. Thanks for stopping by Big Dog Forge. Really appreciate it. Thanks to all you new subscribers and the patrons. You guys are awesome. You rock. And really appreciate each and every one of you. So thanks a lot. We'll talk to you later. Take care of yourselves, and be safe, guys. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye now.